Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're going to get started here. This is so exciting to see everybody coming. I honestly think that this probably would be even a better webinar if I let everybody in the chat and everybody in the room make this presentation, because this is a awesome who's who in the world of ecosystems. So really, it's such a pleasure to be here with all of my peers. And this is an important day for Digital Bridge. We are officially launching GoToEcosystem. I want to thank our core team, Dylan Charles, Andy Lauda, Don Matson. Without them, I wouldn't be here and we wouldn't be talking about GoToEcosystem. So thank you guys for all the work that came to this day and for putting up with me. So I want to just make a few comments about what GoToEcosystem is for those of you who have been following. We have launched something today that we're hoping is going to be an open source movement to change how businesses are run. And we hope you'll see value in contributing, as you already have in your comments. When we post our articles, the comments you guys make are so awesome, and conversations we've had with each of you just have been fantastic. And we really hope you will add your voice to GoToEcosystem. And just a couple of additional comments. You know, Jay McBain, my buddy, likes to say we're in the decade of the ecosystem. Well, I'm in my fourth decade of partnering. So over 30 years, I've been in this space looking at how technology companies go to market vis-a-vis channels. And in the last few years, of course, the ecosystem's become the new buzzword, but it means a lot more than that. It means a lot more than just a buzzword for channels. And we'll talk a lot about why we think this might actually be the century of the ecosystem rather than the decade, because we're certainly in the century of digital. We're still in the early innings, but digital's changing everything. So just a little bit about today. I'm going to talk for about 45 minutes. Hope you'll bear with that. And then we'll allow like the last 10 or so, 15 minutes for Q&A. So please enjoy the conversation with each other as well as with me. I really love to see the chats, you know, being a dialogue for contribution, for thoughts, and, you know, really enjoy each other. Because like I said, this is if I go down the list of attendees, it's pretty much who's who in this space. So you guys enjoy each other as much as I hope that you'll enjoy what Digital Bridge has created here. So without further ado, let's roll the tape. So today we are launching the first part of GoToEcosystem, the why, the what, and a little bit of the how. We have something called a framework, which we're going to go into today. A framework is essentially a process by which CEOs, the C-suite, and partnership leaders can take advantage of the trends in ecosystems to basically reimagine their businesses. And then on the 15th of March is our second piece of the GoToEcosystem rollout, where we'll go deep on the how, the maturity model, the playbook, essentially the tour of the things that are going to be needed if we're going to transform from what we call closed go-to-market to open go-to-market. And we're going to talk more about that. Okay, so we think ecosystems are a new go-to-market paradigm. A few months ago, Jared Fuller and I were on Partner Up podcast, and we were talking about the fact that markets are changing and that we need a new way to think about how we go to market given those changes in the market. So I'm going to talk quite a bit about how those markets are changing, but I'd be remiss not to begin with the fact that everything that can be digitized will be digitized. We are in the very early innings of essentially the virtualization of that which since the beginning of time has been physical. This is not to say that physical is going to go away. It just means that evolving technologies like cloud, SaaS, APIs, algorithms, AIs are changing the way that markets operate. They're changing the way that customers engage. They're changing the way that partners engage. And you see that in this context of a network of actors that dynamically work together. You know, if you look at some of the B2C, just take Uber, for example, or Lyft, you know, just look at the nature of the actors who are dynamically working together. This is a fundamental alteration in the way that we think about society, economics, the way we operate. Just look at the way people operate with their iPhones and go back 15 years, and you couldn't imagine that could have happened, but it did. And it happened because digital is transforming markets. And we are seeing the emergence of these very powerful platform business models, which have historically been in B2C, but are increasingly moving to B2B and their network effects. This is the context by which we understand ecosystems. So ecosystems are essentially the market response to digital, and they're becoming very important because they're altering the returns that you can get by doing business in the old way. So the old stovepipe go-to-market model, where we make things in our own house and ship them out, is falling apart, and the value is diminishing. And what's the exciting part about this is that the days of vendor lock-in and command and control over economies is over, and ecosystems are democratizing markets. And that democratization is taking place in form of customers and partners having a lot more power and a lot more ability to make choices. In the past, that wasn't true. And large vendors, I'm not going to name names, were able to dictate behavior. They were able to use the high switching costs that they had as a mechanism to drive behavior. And as ecosystems are democratizing these markets, they're becoming the new basis for competitive advantage, the new basis for going to market, the new basis for achieving loyalty and customer adoption, and ultimately the model by which we're going to be able to do good in the world. So I won't go on to big soapbox here, but we believe ecosystems are the most powerful vehicle for driving societal contributions. Once we understand the power of partnering in the DNA, we can actually use that to transform the way businesses run. But let's get back to the hard knocks of making money, right? This old quote, which I think everyone has probably memorized by now, is interesting because it essentially puts into context how important ecosystems are, and indicates that CEOs get it. Well, the reality is they don't really get it. Our research of the marketplace says that less than 25% of CEOs really understand the power that ecosystems could have, and even fewer of them know what to do about it. So it's important from the perspective of giving everyone the opportunity to sort of stand back and say, okay, what is an ecosystem, to actually have a definition. And though this is a little bit of a consultative, set of terms, it is important to sort of contextualize what an ecosystem, what it is. So we believe an ecosystem is composed of interdependent participants who work dynamically together in a marketplace. That there is some aspect of orchestration around those ecosystems that drive innovation around platforms and platform features. This is the operational component of a business where, as ecosystem leaders, we can actually make a difference by orchestrating that innovation around platforms with the intent of delivering value. And that value is unique because it's customer-centric. Again, no vendor lock-in. It's modular, which means customers can pick and choose from which actors or contributors in that ecosystem they want to work with. And it's interconnected, which means that the stuff actually works together. And that's really what makes ecosystems work, are these three dynamics of interdependent participants, orchestrated to innovate to deliver customer value. So what does all this mean from a go-to-market perspective? So from our perspective, ecosystems are demanding that we fully terminate what we call the four walls syndrome. So since the beginning of commerce, especially when we didn't have hyperconnectivity and digital, companies made products, and they products in their four walls, and they shipped those products out. So that was what we're calling the closed go-to-market model on the left column of this slide. So we create solutions in-house. Once we've got the solutions, we then find paths to the customer. So from within my four walls, I will find a pathway to a customer. And we typically outsourced sales and delivery to partners. So it's not to say that closed go-to-ecosystems didn't have partners, but it was an outsource. It wasn't a dynamic, interconnected, innovation-oriented, facilitated process. Now, we contrast that to an open go-to-market model, where instead of creating solutions in-house exclusively, we seek out partners to build with us. This is probably the most important piece of the ecosystem mindset and the go-to-ecosystem model, is that in ecosystems, if we want to crush it, we have to figure out how to get partners to build with us. It doesn't always include them building IP on a platform. Well, that's probably the most common, Salesforce.com, it creates a solution, and people build applications on top of it, goes in the marketplace. But it can also be partners building with us to create data value. It could be building with us to create UX and business process value. But there's some aspect of innovation in open go-to-market models where that's pretty much the most important piece that defines it. But we also then leverage partners' paths to the customer. So instead of creating our own paths, the partners have paths established. This is why influence is so important in the ecosystem world. And finally, we align instead of outsourcing on a partnering approach to create value from innovation to influence to sales and delivery. So it's all of that creates that open go-to-market model. So we believe that the way to crush the open go-to-market opportunity is by adopting what we're calling the GoToEcosystem mindset. So with these new market paradigms, right, we need to engage in ecosystem to co-innovate with us. We talked about that. We need to synchronize the co-innovation with the influence they create, with the value realization that occurs across that ecosystem. And we need to begin to really study and manage network effects, because it's the network effects around the customer value that creates all the opportunity for growth and valuation. So I want to just say that a little bit more about that, because these network effects, which we'll talk about in a while, have historically been things people talk about, but they don't really understand in detail. So hopefully one of the things today we're going to do is look at how network effects and ecosystems work together in the GoToEcosystem mindset in order to facilitate value creation. Okay. Andy, I think you can disconnect from your audio there, your video. Okay. So what do we need to have happen here? CEOs essentially need to make ecosystems a top priority. So what's the near-term potential in doing so? So ecosystems are going to fundamentally transform business in the next 5 years. And we believe that to be true because of a number of things, plus we're seeing the market. But McKinsey gave us a wonderful quote, and they said by 2025, 30% of global business revenue will be driven, not just routes to market and transacted, but driven by ecosystems. And this is the part that's absolutely phenomenal about this quote. 5 years, a 15x to 30x increase in the contribution of ecosystems, that they will then represent 30% of business. So that pretty much puts into perspective how important ecosystems are and why we believe that CEOs have to make ecosystem a top 3 priority. So I'd just be interested to, obviously the CEOs on this call, but all of you work for a cool company. If you're in the ecosystem tech stack, you probably have a CEO that's putting ecosystem as a top 3 priority because you're in that business. But if you're not in the ecosystem tech stack and you have a SaaS company and you're offering value, ask this question: does my CEO have ecosystems and the transformative power of ecosystems as a top 3 priority? If they don't, you either need to get them to, or you need to find a new job, because the opportunity for growth and valuation from ecosystems is so significant that if your CEO doesn't get it, you can be assured that valuation of phenomenal proportions are being left on the table. So now I want to go into the second section, which is how ecosystems create value. So our goal here in this part of the discussion is to unpack the value creation dimensions. I've given a lot of hints to them about innovation and network effects, but I want to give you some perspective. But before we do that and look at the details, let's talk a little bit about the notion that not all ecosystems are the same. So I mentioned that, you know, this is my 4th decade in the partnering business. And for 30 years, I've been studying partnership. That's all I've done my whole career. And I would say that, and for those of you that tuned into my heavyweight bout with Jay McBain a couple of months ago that Adam hosted, you may have heard me say that I don't think that channels are not ecosystems. They are. It's just that the ecosystem dynamics have changed some really important aspects of how channels operate. So we can kind of see in the old channel world that ad hoc ecosystems is pretty much what the channel was. You know, you had independent actors, VARs, MSPs, agencies, et cetera, but they weren't organized to create network effects, and they weren't actually able to have the business model impact that orchestrated ecosystems have. So one of our positions in GoToEcosystem is that if you orchestrate your ecosystems, you create this interdependence between actors, and they drive the network effects and the business model innovation. So GoToEcosystem fundamentally is a mindset of business transformation, as much as it is a mindset of how to get routes to market to really work for you. I'd like to thank Ian Y, who, if you haven't already seen it, published the first study of ecosystem business models just in the last couple of weeks. And Greg and team over there are able to, now tell us a little bit about how, high-performing ecosystems perform relative to those that are low performing. And you can kind of use high performance and orchestration as synonymous, but, things like, 1.5 times the cost reduction in their go-to-market and 2.1 times the incremental revenue growth. And these are not, in my opinion, the final frontier of value. We're going to start seeing numbers that are more like 10x these numbers. But right now, since we're still in the early innings of the ecosystem, it's great to see that there's quantitative results that talk to this. But let's put that into some more perspective. So one of the things I'd like to do today for the first time is talk about the notion of how ecosystems and business models interact and interrelate. So my friend Avanish Sahai published some great articles. If you haven't read Avanish's work on platforms and ecosystems, it's really fantastic. One of the things that Avanish and I were having dinner last week, and we were talking about the fact that there's this interesting dynamic between business models and ecosystems. And our perspective on this is that the greatest economic returns are going to come to companies who move more on the horizontal axis from a product business model to a platform business model, and move from an ad hoc ecosystem to orchestrated ecosystem. So the upper right-hand corner of this chart is really where the great returns are. And no surprise, the most profitable and most valuable companies in the world are in the upper right-hand corner. So most of us today are somewhere in moving from this lower left-hand corner to this upper right-hand corner. Let's talk a little bit about these quadrants for a second. So starting in the lower left-hand corner, one of the dimensions that really explains the movement from a product to a platform business model is whether or not we are engaging in existing markets or whether we are creating new markets. So to give an example of that, the average SaaS company who, say, competes in HR or sales or marketing, tech stack, or wherever, is competing in an existing market. They have features and functions that they're offering to customers, and they have, in most cases, siloed ecosystems, which means that they're doing their job of finding who to build with and who to sell with and who to do customer value realization, but the orchestration of those siloed ecosystems is not yet mature enough to create real value. Now let's jump to the upper right-hand corner. Orchestrated ecosystems that create new markets. So let's, for example, take Slack. Slack created a new market for collaboration. You could say that Slack kind of competes with email and text and chat, but really Slack created a new market called the Slack ecosystem and the Slack business model. And Slack is very much of a platform business model, which has multi-sided players, because all platform business models have more than two sides that are kind of working together to create that new market. And the orchestration of those players is what makes it all work. Bringing it to something simple like Uber, right? Uber created a new market, the new rideshare market, right? Again, it competes with taxi cabs, but it's a fundamentally different market than the taxi business. And then they orchestrate the players, the riders and the drivers, to come and build that new market. So that's the path from the lower left to the upper right. But it's important to understand that the upper left and the lower right are both contributing factors. So the lower right is really where we look at how to drive that co-innovation through some kind of platform. And the upper left talks about how we align the players to create the network effects. So the combination of both of those things gets you to the upper right. Now, I want to make one quick observation about this. This is not a move from lower left to upper right. This is a movement along this arrow. So if you're here at the lower left, it's highly valuable to move to the middle of this matrix, where you're in the hybrid between a product and a platform. And in fact, many companies are actually hybrid. Most, I would argue, B2B companies who platform their business are going to maintain a hybrid model where they still have a product business, but that product business is also platforming. I think the best example of this is Salesforce.com. So when Mark started the company, he started the company as a product company. He was selling CRM. Now, one could argue that by virtue of the fact that there was no CRM per se, he created a new market, but stick with me on the story, right? He basically has a product with a set of features aimed at a ICP called the sales organization. But what he realized is in order for him to really crush it, because he wanted to have everybody using Salesforce, he needed to platform the business. So what did he do? He basically, from the lower left-hand corner, lower right-hand corner of this slide, he took the IaaS and the PaaS, separated from the SaaS, which was CRM, and he made it available for others to build on. So that's this driving co-innovation through connected platforms. But Salesforce also did a great job of aligning the partners to drive network effects by making sure that the partners had a huge value proposition and helping the partners to understand that they could sell and innovate and deliver value and could participate in a program that was orchestrating the players. So hopefully what you're coming away from is you're coming away with the understanding that the combination of platform and ecosystem together is really the transformational element. So ecosystems are, when combined with platform business models, really crushing it. All the most valuable companies are ecosystem companies who have platform business models. 30% of global economic activity is perceived in the next few years to be derived from the combination of ecosystems that are platforming, and 60% of all the unicorns are ecosystems aligned with platform business models. So if you haven't already gotten that message, this is the way to crush it. So now we're at the beginnings of the framework. So far I've been talking a lot about why ecosystems are so important, why GoToEcosystems framework might be useful, but now I want to lay down the foundations of value. So the ecosystem value foundation. So we believe that there are 6 superpowers that ecosystems have that are and will change business. So you wouldn't be surprised to see that number 1 is innovation, right? The value that you create through innovation. The second is influence, the ability to, we talked about the fact that in the new open GoToEcosystem model, we have the capability to find existing routes to market or existing paths to the customer, because so much influence out there with all those folks that surround the customer, that we now have a new way to go to market by measuring and valuing the influence that our partners have. But we should be remiss not to bring the historical channel back into conversation, because routes to market, as Jay and I have discussed, follow the money is important. It's important to understand where the money is going and how the money is transacting, because that's essentially what turns the turnstiles of our business. So ecosystems are also really important to help us in selling, probably less reselling, probably more co-selling and referral, but nonetheless, it's really important to understand that. At 6 o'clock is probably the most important dimension of all, other than innovation, which is value realization. Now, for many, many years, channel business, VARs, system integrators have been in the value realization mode. That's going to continue. It's actually going to become more important, because as ecosystems evolve and this highly interdependent, modular, customer-mediated world of ecosystems changes the former command and control stovepipe, and these flywheels come about. The ability to drive value realization, bringing all the pieces together in a coherent way, is going to be even more important than it was before. And we believe that it's going to be the renaissance of the channel. So for those of you who are thinking, oh, channel gone, it's not true. The channel will have a rebirth in value realization as these constellations of planets, suns, moons, and stars, and planets come together in a more integrated way, which is why the innovation at 12 o'clock and the value realization at 6 o'clock are so vitally important to understand, and also the synchronization of all the 1 through 6 together. So 5 and 6. So we talked about network effects earlier. I'm going to go into some detail about that. And finally, trust and sustainability. which is what we believe is the most important driver to ensure that humans stay on the planet and don't get booted by global warming and various other tragedies of the greed and avarice of the conventional business model, which we believe ecosystems can uniquely solve. Okay, so innovation. This is a great quote from IDC. You know, in 5 years, or 4 years now, a quarter of all of the new application portfolio development will be developed by the ecosystem. That's pretty significant. You know, if you think about like where spend happens today, most spend happens in the four-wall syndrome, but a quarter of that's going to already go out of the four walls and be happening in the ecosystem. That's why, again, the innovation layer is so important. Influence. So for those of you who run revenue operations, you know, it's kind of a sad day, right? Cookies are gone. CAC is increasing. People don't want to talk to the salesperson. 60% of the buying decisions happen before the sales engagement. So this is why those people who leverage the companies who your ICP trusts, your ideal customer profile trusts, crush it. So my friend Adam Milkowski, partnered, and I developed this concept of the sphere of influence, which are all the companies that surround your ICP. So if your ICP is this individual in the middle, you got tech partners, agencies, consultants, all system integrators surrounding that ICP. If we leverage these folks, this sphere of influence, we crush the go-to-market process. So that's why influence is the new jam in ecosystems, replacing sourced, because it doesn't really matter who takes the order. It matters who creates the influence, because that's the thing that's going to get you share of mind. And creating influence synergies is a function of combining yourself with the companies your ICP trusts. Sales. So a couple of weeks ago, we introduced the ecosystem sales funnel. And the idea of the ecosystem sales funnel is that ecosystem impacts the top of the funnel. So ecosystem is both the top of the funnel, and it also surrounds the funnel. It even surrounds the funnel on a post-sales basis, because one of the problems with the sales funnel is it just looks at the stuff that happens before you get your initial customer win and doesn't look at the long tail. But using the ecosystem to turbocharge your funnel is a foundation for the selling model. And again, that's probably going to be more through co-sell than resell. But nonetheless, when you start to think of routes to market and you have an ecosystem impact that surrounds the funnel, it's a pretty good idea to work on the gray box, not just to get caught up in the blue and the green boxes below it. So SAP had some great research talking about how you can drive greater share of wallet outcomes through leveraging that ecosystem funnel that I mentioned. So sales cycles are faster, deal sizes are bigger, and close rates are higher. That's why if you have a sales organization and your sales organization isn't selling with the sellers of other sales organizations, you are missing the boat. There is an exciting moment here to leverage new ideas like account-based networking that allow companies to use this sales driver inside of ecosystems to really change the game. And it's all about salespeople talking to salespeople. Okay, so customer value realization. Okay, this is nothing new from those of us who grew up in the channel, right? You know, what do system integrators, agencies, and consultants do for us? They implement and integrate, they drive change management, they ensure retention and expansion. But again, this is not like yesterday's channel, because at the end of the day, what's going to happen is that the constellation of suns, moons, and planets into these integrated ecosystems is going to create a new distribution paradigm, if you will. And the channel or customer value realization players have the opportunity to bring all these pieces together to create that customer value. So again, I mentioned earlier, we're going to see the reemergence of the channel take place in the next 3 or 4 years. It's going to be an exciting time, but it'll be a different dimension. It won't look like the old days with distribution. Okay, so customer value realization, data points. This is pretty exciting. You know, don't forget the power of integrated solutions, right? If you Vendasta did a study of SMBs. This is sort of an average. I'm not suggesting that most companies who have a 30% retention with a single product are going to stay in business. But the bottom line is as the number of integrations increase, the percentage of churn declines and lifetime value increases. So if you're not already getting this, your customer success organization ought to be using integrated solutions based on your platforming strategy and your orchestration of ecosystems to really solve for the problem of customer retention. It's the easiest and fastest way to drive customer retention. Okay, network effects. So what are network effects? Essentially, this is the whole idea of leveraging the power of relationship-based economies. So if you have multiple players, buyers, sellers, producers, consumers working together, when one goes up, the other goes up. So as the ecosystem, which is another way of talking about a network, grows, we can attract new users, we can become stickier, and we can drive monetization. Usually there's 3 dimensions to network effects. For those of you who haven't read the book, The Cold Start Problem, Andrew Chen from Andreessen Horowitz wrote a great book talking about network effects and whatnot. It's really an excellent read, but it talks about acquisition as a network effect. So the ability to acquire new customers is a function of having created this dynamic interplay between players. Engagement, which means once you've got the customer, can you drive further engagement? And then the economic aspects of network effects, which create lower cost and increased velocity in the generation of revenue and lifetime value. So really important as we build these transformational models in using ecosystems and platforms that we actually model and study network effects and look at them very, very holistically in order to drive the business. Okay, for those of you who have been following me, you'll know that I'm a big believer in the how can I help model. And the basic idea behind successful partnerships, and this has actually been demonstrated through neurological research, is that when you come to a partner and you ask them, how can I help you? You create a reciprocity loop that changes the way that we work together. Almost all the history of partnering has been, how can my partner help me? And whenever we go in with that attitude, we lose the magic of the ecosystem. The DNA of an ecosystem is based on the concept of trust through service. We build trust by being in service, how can I help, to create a win-win. That's the basis of partnership. By the way, it's true for partnerships in personal relationships, it's true for partnerships in business relationships. But at the end of the day, our belief is that if companies adopt this mindset for working with their ecosystem, it's a natural step for them to move from doing that to doing that with their companies. And that's why we believe ecosystems are a potential path to help us overcome societal problems, climate change, death, and a whole variety of other things that cause a lot of suffering in the world. Okay, great. So now we are going to move into the beginning of the how. So far, just to summarize, we've talked about why ecosystems are so important. We've talked about how digital transformation has introduced an entirely new dynamic into the world, and how as everything digitizes, ecosystems pop-ups being the fastest and best way to sort of facilitate that. And a go-to-ecosystem mindset is needed in order to move from that closed go-to-market mindset to that open go-to-mindset. We talked about that ecosystems have these powerful business model implications with the ability to, when combined with platforms, drive all kinds of outsized economic returns, higher valuations, higher growth. And we talked about the 6 dimensions of ecosystem value creation: innovation, influence, selling, value realization, network effects, and sustainability and trust. But now we're going to move into a new conversation about how a framework can help companies to unleash the power of the ecosystem to achieve those results at the same time as we serve the greater good, to drive strategic alignment and organizational change. I'm going to stop on that one for a second because that's the big one. As great as you could say, I get the power of the ecosystem, I understand how it's going to help me achieve top results. If alignment and organizational change do not take place, nothing will happen. This is one of the reasons why the CEO, your CEO, has to own the GoToEcosystem framework. No one else can do this besides the CEO and the board. And finally, this notion that if we get this right, we can create sustained growth and increase valuation. And that's really the magic of the GoToEcosystem framework. Okay, so there are 3 parts to the GoToEcosystem framework. the strategy, how we align internally on what we're trying to do. This, by the way, is both strategy and vision. Who do we want to be? There's an opportunity to use the ecosystem and platform business model transformation as an opportunity to reimagine vision. But let's assume your vision is really good and your vision is pretty solid and it's exciting and employees are passionate about it. What's our strategy going to be in order to facilitate getting the most out of the ecosystem and that platform transformation? The second part of the layer is how we execute cross-functionally. It's hopefully obvious at this point that, the old days of siloed engagement where, someone goes off and innovates and someone goes off and influences, someone goes off and sells and someone goes off and does customer value realization are gone. We have to execute cross-functionally. No longer can we just have these silos going off and thinking of routes to market. We have to think of this across an integrated firm with an integrated ecosystem. And finally, we need to manage. And so we think these layers are different because they're actually different swim lanes, different streams of engagement to facilitate the outcome of what we're talking about. So strategy. So we believe that the CEO needs to own ecosystem strategy and alignment. They need to drive the strategy. They need to ensure that each of the lines of business, product, marketing, sales, customer success, and the partner organization, these are the 5 really important lines of business, ensure buy-in, and they need to own the change management process. So for those of you that are wondering, like, where's the finance department and where is the HR department and where is the manufacturing group, we're not intending to suggest that those teams are not important. Obviously, if you're a manufacturing company, that's product. We're simply saying that these are the 6 organizational sort of drivers of the GoToEcosystem framework. And again, if you include the CEO as one of those, this is the job of the CEO to drive that process. So what we're going to talk about on the 15th is a lot more of the details of how to move from early stage to late stage and what the maturity model looks like to give a more clear sense of what that journey of the strategy looks like, because of course this is a multi-year journey. So if you are at stage A and you want to get to stage Z, you're not going to get there in 6 months. You're going to get there in 3 to 5 years. So we're looking to create a 3-year planning horizon for our clients to facilitate that movement from ad hoc product to orchestrated platform, and that's going to take time. So it needs to be viewed in the context of a transformation, not in the context of an initiative. So we'll talk a little bit more about that on the 15th. The second piece we talked about is execution. So if you think about the ecosystem value foundations that we talked about before, you're going to find a lot of them here, but with a little bit of a twist. So the CEO, of course, we talked about strategy and the importance of strategy. The product organization's responsibility is for the build. The marketing organization's responsibility is for the influence. Sales is obviously responsible for selling. Again, probably more co-selling than reselling, but we don't want to get too lost in that. Customer success is responsible for realization of value, and the partner organization is responsible for managing partnerships. So each of these organizations needs to own the KPIs of the ecosystem. So I wrote a blog a couple months ago about embedded partnering. And it was the notion that every single organization, including the CEO, needs to embed the ecosystem in their strategy, in their go-to-market, in their KPIs, that ensures that when handoffs happen, they don't happen in a broken way, and it ensures that we create partner-friendly standard operating procedures. That vast majority of those on the call who run partner organizations can really feel what I'm about to say. A lot of the times we go out into the marketplace to reach out to our partners, and we make big promises and we do business development and we talk about really cool things. And then we go back to the ranch only to find out that back at the ranch, there are all these misalignment points where the organizations, whether they product, marketing, sales, customer success, don't have aligned KPIs. They don't understand the value partners play. They don't understand how partners help them recover their quotas or meet their objectives. They don't understand the handoffs, and they don't understand the standard operating procedures that are going to make the ecosystem work. The whole idea of executing cross-functionally is ensuring that we achieve that goal, but it doesn't happen outside the strategy. It happens after the strategy. Then we align in the KPIs, do the handoffs, and create the standard operating procedures. So again, this is an opportunity for the CEO and the C-suite to have a holistically developed plan to ensure that everything we came up with in strategy can be executed from an executional perspective. And finally, management. Now, again, I didn't mean to imply that you would do these necessarily in this order, although strategy should always come first. The whole concept of developing the required execution capabilities and managing them needs to be happening holistically. But the concept of shared management is really important. The partner function needs to own the management, but it's really a matrix. Jay wrote a great blog a couple of weeks ago talking about the ecosystem chief ecosystem officer, chief partner officer, whatever you'd like to call them, being the ultimate matrixed role. And why that's true is because every single function across these lines of business needs to operate interdynamically with attribution, enablement, engagement, incentivization, operations, relationships. All of these dimensions of the management layer that the partner organization are going to own need to be borrowed and leveraged by all the other groups. So for example, the operations may have analytics, and analytics is going to take the attribution feature and it's going to publish dashboards. Well, those dashboards need to be operated and iterated by all the different functions of the groups. And so you can see that although every one of these things is listed as being part of the partner organization, it's actually in the other organizations where most of the value gets created. And sure, the partner organization's got to have the program, has to manage the partners, the partner account managers are there. But if the value is not happening in the other groups, chances are pretty good that that partner leader is going to be back in the old school of promising something to the partner and then not being able to deliver it because the rest of the organization cannot support the model correctly. So the principles here, right? And this is sort of like, I'm going to leave you with this last couple slides. The principles are that ecosystems are not just another way to think about routes to market. They are the way to think about your business model. They're the way to think about your go-to-market model. They're the way to think about your economic model. And if they're not designed in accordingly, they will always be under-realize the value. Ecosystem success depends on your CEO, which is one of the reasons we're going to dedicate the rest of our time in Digital Bridge to helping CEOs in the C-suite really get this, because if they don't, we miss the opportunity. Every LOB has to buy in to become partner first. We're developing some ideas on democratizing markets, like ecosystems democratize markets, but they only democratize markets if the LOBs that support them are partner first. So we're starting to see the emergence of a number of very exciting startups in the ecosystem tech stack that are organizing ecosystems for ecosystems, where they're building partner-based business models that formulate the idea that companies can now organize around the ecosystem without having to go through these vendor stovepipes. So LOBs had better both be paying attention to those and be partner first if they want to take advantage of this ecosystem democratization. And finally, ecosystem DNA. I would not be doing this work, I've been in this business for a long time, if I didn't believe that ecosystems were the best way to solve societal problems. And so we're really committed to the idea that as companies use ecosystems to crush it, they'll also use ecosystems to create win-win relationships and begin to contribute to society. So ecosystems, the red thread to win and do good. So with that, I'll just stop by saying that on March 15th, we hope you're back for part 2. At the very beginning of this chat, I put in a link. I think you guys can check out that link at the very, you can register for the March 15th, go to ecosystem webinar. We are going to go deep, and we're going to be much more about the how, and hopefully this has been useful. And now I'm going to invite Dylan to come on the line, and Dylan's been monitoring the chat, which I have not been monitoring. So Dylan, what are some of the questions that folks are interested in talking about? We have about 15 minutes.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, folks, if you have other questions, please put them in the chat or jump in. One big question was, are we going to share the slides? And just to confirm that that will happen. So rest easy. I think one of the topics that was raised early on was sort of a comment about go-to-market versus route to market, and how the relationship between the two. I think implicit in that is a question about how would you say that going to market is distinct from going to ecosystem, Alan? Because I think that's essentially one of the roots of your story here. What's changed in terms of go to market and it's sort of the new go to ecosystem model? We talked about closed versus open. Interested on you to riff on that topic, go to market versus go to ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that the beginning part of the question is routes to market. And I think it's a useful way to think about this value that ecosystems play. Historically, routes to market are what I call downstream value creation motions, right? You make the product, right? And then someone else is going to go and sell it for you, a route to market, right? It's kind of back to that four walls syndrome, right? Which says in go to market, in a closed go to market model, we make the product and then someone else takes it to market, as in a route to market. What we see as being the fundamental difference in the ecosystem model and why go to ecosystem is different than go to market is it starts to look upstream. It looks upstream at vision. It looks upstream at innovation. It looks upstream at influence. And it says, my customer, my ICP, already has established relationships with companies that have more influence, trust, and value creation than I do. So I pretty much would be an idiot, right? If I thought that I could create this amazing product and that I could break through the walls of indifference and overcome the high cost of CAC and all the other dynamics to break into that tent where all those ICPs are floating around that I could essentially help out, right? This is this idea that, surrounding your ICP are all these spheres of influence. So at the same time, what makes ecosystems really pop is when we talked about this, is this movement from product to platform, which really speaks to the value of innovation, right? Because if I can get someone to co-innovate with me, and ideally that same individual who I co-innovate is also in my ICP, the sphere of influence, then the selling and value realization is a no-brainer. So by flipping the model from post-sales or post-development downstream to starting with upstream, I create an entirely new go-to-market orientation as a function of having thought about the market, thought about my vision, thought about how I can make products that others build on, thought about how I can leverage people that already influence my ICP. It's like obvious, right? It would be obvious. And this is the reason why, IDC is saying that we're going to see these consortia of ecosystems popping up that are going to do most of the new application portfolio development. It's not going to happen in-house. So a go-to-ecosystem mindset is, because it has that upstream quality and the downstream, reimagining business. It's really I would almost say like go-to-market is not necessarily a business model transformation vehicle. It's more of an execution vehicle. Go-to-ecosystem is both a business transformation vehicle and an execution vehicle. So it accomplishes the goals of go-to-market, but it does so by reimagining business. That's how I'd answer that question. Hopefully that blab was useful.
So couple other topics have come up. One, sort of a quick question is it a prerequisite for an organization to have an open platform and or API strategy for an ecosystem model, or can that, and the implication there is, and or can that be a closed model?
It's a great question. I have a personal philosophy about this, and I don't have quantitative research on it, but everything I study says open. And the reason for open is, there's this old adage, it's not the things that I know about that are going to kill me. It's the things I don't know about that are going to kill me, or affectionately called blind spot, right? The reason to be open is because there's a philosophy of this notion that we're in a harbor, right? And when the water rises, all the boats go up. And the only way that happens is to be open. If you're closed, you almost by definition put yourself into a box. Now, that said, I'm not suggesting that those companies that adhere to a platform are not in some aspects in a walled garden. I mean, if you looked at Apple, who's one of the most powerful go-to-ecosystem companies on the planet, you could pretty much determine that, Android out, Apple iOS in. So if you adhere to the iOS and Mac OS environments and you develop around the Apple ecosystem, you're going to create values. Is Apple's ecosystem closed or open? I think it's actually not the right question, right? It's really more of, how do I orchestrate the platform in such a way as to create the maximum amount of ecosystem participation to add value to the customer? And if that requires some walled garden aspects, great. If it doesn't, don't do it. But something, you and I, Dylan, we were having lunch in Berkeley last week, and we were talking about a very interesting phenomenon, which is that closed ecosystems are typically more associated with a greed orientation. All for me, all for me. And open ecosystems typically are more associated with the opposite of zero sum, or all boats in the harbor, or even if I would just say a love model, where we're inviting everyone to participate because we believe in the value we're creating, and we're not greedy, and we want everyone to win. We don't want this to be a us versus them model. So I think closed kind of puts us back into that us versus them orientation versus all boats in the harbor metaphor approach.
Cool. I laugh at the fact that this conversation happened in Berkeley, and it's sort of appropriate to the but anyway,
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of conversation about sort of this organizational point, these key organizational points you raised about embedding sort of an ecosystem role across the organization, and making sure that there is someone representing that strategy and model in each of the different LoBs. But also sort of discussion about, there was one question which I think is interesting. If your partner organization reports the sales, are you essentially cut off from effectively, executing on an ecosystem strategy? But I think your main point here, and I'll let you answer, is that as long as there's a ecosystem role embedded in all of these organizations, they all own it, and they share that ownership and coordinate, things are going to go in the right direction. Whereas if everything's stovepiped, or there are stovepipes and responsibilities in just one part of the organization, things will probably go south. But I'll let you answer. That's sort of a topic that's been.
Yeah, that's a great topic. Back in the day when ecosystems was just another word for channel, everything was about ACV, sourced revenue, ACV. And where would that ecosystem report? It would report into sales. I mean, that's a given, right? And I think this is an artifact of the past, that the ecosystem organization reports into sales. We're seeing in the emergence of the SaaS taking over the world, that we're starting to see ecosystems increasingly report somewhere else. Sometimes it's reporting into finance because it's seen as being, make buy partner, right? And you think about that as being as an economic model. So it reports to finance and strategy. Or product, right? In many cases, the ecosystem chief is thinking product because it's a platform decision. And in other instances, it's still a sales function. Our strong belief is, as the CEO owns the strategy, the ecosystem leader needs to report to the CEO. That, in our opinion, is a requirement for maturity. In our maturity model that we're creating, that you'll see on the 15th, we talk about highlights. Now, one of the watermark crossover points is that you have a C-suite partner leader, ecosystem chief partner officer, whatever you call them, reporting to the CEO, period. If that doesn't happen, not only does the partner leader not have the authority, budget, credibility, social capital, but when it comes to managing this execution cross-functionality that I talk about here, if this partner leader is not a change agent to take the strategy from the CEO, and with the empowerment of the CEO, go to each of these groups to facilitate owning their own KPIs for partnering, figuring out the handoffs, and creating these partner-friendly SOPs, it will be ineffectual. And when we study the failure in companies who try to do ecosystems, the biggest one is that the leader is not empowered by the CEO and does not have the cross-functional credibility to drive the change. Because if there's one thing that I want you to take away from this is a multi-year journey with a shitload of change management, especially for established companies. I mean, if you're a brand new born in SaaS company, you can skip all the legacy and go right to this. But regardless of whether you're the CEO of a startup or you're the CEO of Oracle or SAP or IBM or Microsoft or Google or whoever, if you do not have the CEO of the company driving and the partner leader is not reporting to the CEO, you got big problems.
I made an interesting comment that in addition to sharing these KPIs and OKRs, you kind of want to have an ambassador for the ecosystem in all of these organizations, or someone who's an advocate working to do that sort of shared execution.
Absolutely.
Yes. It's more than just having a number. You need people aligned.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that, it's not a surprise, right, that when each of these organizations sort of goes about doing their blue box underneath their function, that there's a leader there, a leader in product, a leader in marketing, a leader in sales, a leader in customer success. They're not necessarily the in-charge person, but they're, to your point, I like that word, ambassador, change agent, coordination point, alignment. When you do interlocks, every company that's big does the interlocks when they do planning. The interlock function needs to be through that ambassador in order to ensure that the right KPIs that roll up to the top KPIs and OKRs get managed in the correct way. All right, Dylan, I think we've got 1 minute left. Any last questions, or should we call it? Should we make it a wrap?
I think there's a lot of commentary. A number of folks, Carl, Zhao, others have raised the point that it's critical that this role report into the CEO. And you sort of, you voiced that as well in your commentary on reporting into sales as kind of the old model.
Great. Well, with that said, I'd like to thank everyone so much for all the collaboration that's gone into this work. I can't wait to have you back on the March 15th for part 2. And I wish you all a wonderful day, and go crush it with the ecosystem. Take care now.